Okay, next up, we are going to invite Dale Furtwengler up. Friends tell him they have a difficult time introducing him because there's so much he's done over the years. He's not sure if they're saying he's old or he suffers from ADD or ADHD. Let's just add another consonant in there. One thing has transcended all his efforts. He's been an avid student of human behavior, which has led us to his life's work. And today he's going to share that with us, doing business in a down economy. Dale, thank you for your presentation today.
Thanks, Darlene. It's long been my contention that the economy doesn't matter. And it wasn't until recently that I actually had data to back up that contention. And I was able to refer back to the 2008 recession, the worst recession we had in 7 decades. And as a result of that, I was able to do some financial analysis on the company, some of the companies, and how they fared during the recession to add some credence to that the economy really doesn't matter. So what I'm going to do is share with you some information on 4 companies, 2 premium price strategy companies, 2 low price strategy companies. And these are all publicly traded companies because that's the only place I could find financial data on a company. But some people say, well, yeah, but those are big companies. It's different. It's really not. Steve was talking about universal truths earlier at our table. And the core business concepts apply to every business, regardless of size. The only thing that larger companies have, when you add zeros to the numbers, the only difference it makes is that you have more options available to you. So to give you an example, when I was the CFO of a mortgage banking firm, there were times when we had millions of dollars of excess cash, and I was able to invest them overnight and generate thousands of dollars of revenue on interest for us. Well, when I worked with smaller clients later on, when I had my own business providing part-time CFO services, and I had a client that had $10,000 worth of excess cash, the transaction costs associated with the banking didn't make it worthwhile to go through that effort. So all you have with bigger numbers, there's more options, okay? So that's the entire thing there. Now, what I'm going to share with you is the financial performance of these 4 companies for the years 2009 to 2012. I intentionally excluded 2008, which was the heart of the recession, because even big name companies like Kraft and Procter & Gamble were sitting on their hands in terms of pricing. Then remember, just to refresh our memories about what was going on in that time period, the economists told us that the recession ended in June of 2009. Now, none of us could tell that because our 401ks and our home values were still in the tank. At the same time, unemployment was still in the upper 8 range. So very high unemployment. And we were being bombarded almost daily with news reports of countries on the verge of bankruptcy. So one of the most challenging times in our history, okay? So now I'm going to share with you the performance of these 4 companies. Okay, so the 4 companies are Apple, Panera, those are our premium price strategy companies, Walmart and Amazon, the low price strategy companies. So how did they perform during this recession and the period immediately after? Well, Apple generated revenue growth. They came in first at a compound annual growth rate in revenues of 44.3%. Huge growth. And their operating margins, which is the profit after overhead costs, went up 14.5%, which was a 63% improvement over what they had done previously. The company that came in second in terms of revenue growth was Amazon. They came in at 26.3%, annual compound annual growth rate in revenues, but their margins, their operating margin dropped by 2%. So they were actually working harder to generate a lower rate of return. I don't know about you, but that's not my idea of a fun business. Okay. Company came in third was Panera. Their compound annual growth rate was 10.7%. And they had a 2.2% improvement in their operating margin, which was a 14% improvement over what they had done previously. And one of the things that is not obvious in these numbers, Panera was one of the few companies that consistently raised their prices throughout this time period, 2009, 2012. They regularly raised their prices. The company that came in last was Walmart. Their compound annual growth rate was only 3.5%. Now, in fairness, if we look at the starting revenue numbers, theirs were significantly higher than everybody else's. So the percentage improvement was obviously going to be less. But their operating margin improvement was only 0.1%, a 1% improvement. And again, what's not obvious from these numbers is that during this time frame, 2009, 2012, Walmart actually experienced 9 consecutive quarters of declining sales in the US. 9 consecutive quarters. And when they finally turned it around in the 10th quarter, they had to give up almost 10% of their gross margin, the profit after cost of goods sold, in order to get that turnaround. Okay? Significant differences. So I'm going to put you on the spot now. What do you glean from these results? Is there anything that jump out at you that fairly obvious? Wes?
Pricing doesn't matter.
Pricing doesn't matter? Right. Well, I don't know about you, but prior to having done this analysis, I thought what happened in a down economy was that people, consumers, would shift their spending, which they obviously have, but they would shift their spending in a way that they would reduce the discretionary spending so they'd have money for the necessities. That would have been my logical thought process, okay? This tells it just the opposite. What this tells us is that they try to find ways to minimize what they're paying for the necessities to get what they want. I mean, nobody needed an iPhone, iPod, or iPad, right? Nobody needed those. They weren't essential for survival. Nobody needed to eat out during a recession, but they wanted to. So one of the lessons we can learn from these numbers is not only that price doesn't matter, but position your offerings to be something they want, not something they need. Okay? Because in a down economy, they're going to reevaluate what they need, and they're going to look for the lowest price to cover those needs so that they have money available for what they enjoy. Okay? So in a down economy, a lot of people think that that is the riskiest time for a business. And really the opposite is true. The highest risk for a business is in good economic times. And here's why. During good economic times, when people and companies have high levels of discretionary income, they start looking for ways to spend it. And so, excuse me. So they'll see things that interest them that they might not normally buy, and they're willing to spend money on those, but they're typically not willing to pay full price. And so they'll look at a lower price, ask for a lower price. And business owners look at that and think, wow, I'll look at this additional demand that's there for but my price is a little too high. I'm not closing the deal. But if I lower my price by just 10%, look at all the business I could get. And so they expand their capacity to get that demand, and they lower their prices to get those sales. And then when the next shiny object comes along or the next economic downturn occurs, those buyers all go away. And now the company's left with a larger infrastructure to have to cover the cost of that. They got reduced revenues because they lost part of their customer base. And their ideal customers who were willing to pay a premium to get what they had in the first place are now paying a lower price as well. So the real danger for a business is in good economic times. The companies that thrive, and we see companies that thrive in a worst recession in 7 decades, the ones that thrive are the ones who are providing something that people really want. They stay focused on their ideal customers, and they don't reduce their prices regardless of what's going on. So if you want your business to thrive, regardless of the economy that you're in, keep those 3 things in mind. At this point, I'll open the floor for questions.
Dale,
Yes.
can we assume then, or is it appropriate to think that this current situation that we're in would work the same way? In other words, do you think this is kind of a universal truth?
I do. Yeah. There's no question that people change their buying habits during an economic downturn. But what they do is they shift their spending to what's most important to them. So my wife and I like to eat out on the weekends, and we also like to travel. Okay, so when the economic downturn hits, we'll forego some of the eating out because we prefer to travel over eating out. Okay, so we alter our spending, but we're always moving to what's most important, shifting the spending there. So yeah, there are some changes. But if you stay focused on your ideal customer, and the way I identify or define an ideal customer is somebody who's willing to pay your price in good times and bad. They value it that highly. And if you stay focused on that and keeping them happy, then and avoiding the temptation to go after higher revenues from people that are just moderately interested in what you have to offer, who aren't willing to pay a full price or need additional concessions. If you can avoid that, you're golden, regardless of the economy.
Dale, question for you.
Sure.
It appears to us, in working with a lot of smaller business owners, that pricing is a issue that they have a lot of fear around. They don't adjust prices very often. One of the things that occurred to me from your examples is all of those companies tend to follow a dynamic pricing model. So they'll price up and down as the market will move, right? But most small business owners are afraid to play with pricing or adjust their pricing dynamically. And I think you just hit on maybe one of the core secrets that they need to learn on that. But would you speak to that a little farther?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of dynamic pricing. I think it confuses the customer. It doesn't give them a sense for what the real value is. So if you look at an Apple or Panera, well, Panera less so today, and I'll get into that in a moment, but Apple, they don't adjust their prices. So the customer,
They're always adjusting them up.
well, up is fine, down is not. But what they're doing is they're if you want to say testing, they're testing the market to see how much people really value it. But there's no doubt about the value. Dynamic pricing, when the price floats up and down, then people begin to question the value. And when they get confused about value, then their default in the decision-making process about what to buy and what to forgo is price. You know, and one of the examples that I use in a lot of presentations that I do is buying a new car. You go to the dealer, you find the car you're looking for, you sit down with the salesperson, and you start negotiating, right? And so you finally come up with a price that you agree on. And I ask people, when you drive off the lot, let me see a show of hands. How many of you feel like you got a good deal? And rarely will I see a hand go up. Why? Because the car didn't change. So they don't really know, the buyer doesn't really know whether they got value for the dollar. And that's a level of dissatisfaction that immediately destroys the relationship. It destroys their confidence level in you as a business person. But when you set a price based on value and you hold firm on that, and if they want a cheaper price, then they've got to accept an alternative that has less associated with it. So they're giving up something to get the lower price. That's when they're most comfortable with their decision making. That's when they're most comfortable with their purchase and when they're happier with the relationship they have with you.
Yeah, Dale, I want to piggyback on that, especially with the automobile industry. You may recall back many, many years, Saturn created a new kind of car company. One of the things that was completely different is that they had hard and fast set sales price, period. Wasn't up, wasn't down. They went away. At least that business model went away. And automobile dealers continue to engage in this kind of haggling and negotiating methodology. Why does that continue when the point you just got done making seems to make so much sense?
Yeah, I think Saturn's failure, and I was not really a student of that whole thing, but I think Saturn's failure there was not on the pricing side. It was on keeping up with the design elements and the uniqueness, that sort of thing, possibly some of the marketing efforts associated with it. You know, why dealers? Because what they're used to. I mean, we fall into a habit, you know. And there was a time decades ago, and I think it may be less true now than it was previously, but there was a time back in the 50s, 60s, and maybe even some of the 70s, where people loved negotiating. You know, the resources were a lot more scarce in the 50s and 60s. Income levels weren't quite as high. And so people got in the habit of negotiating for almost everything. And some people really enjoyed that. And so I think it's a holdover from some of those earlier years. Steve, did you have another question?
Yeah, I think you hit on a key point. When you talked about the customer is shopping value, the seller is thinking price, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just had this experience with one of my clients on Monday night with a client who had not changed price in the last 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? We all know that inflation's been running at about 8% a year, and you know, we are technically in a recession right now, whether the news media will say that to you or not, right? But he is now in a position where the pain is so extreme, he has to consider many options, not just price. So I guess what I'm taking from your talk is the key thing is the customer is buying value. The customer will adjust their perception of value based on the price point, right?
Right.
They're never going to let you get too far out of the range that you could buy that product for. So, you know, if I can buy this pen for $1 just about anywhere in town, and you want to sell it to me for $5, it better come with something special in addition to just this pen.
Exactly. There's got to be a strong differentiator, a strong appeal to that customer in order for them
that's what
to pay that price.
I speak to.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because as you were talking, I recalled a presentation I did a number of years ago. And I was talking about the fact that people associate premium prices with higher quality, greater value of some sort, right? So it's natural. And a woman in the audience raised her hand at that point and said, you know, you're exactly right. She said, I've got a 10-year-old daughter and she's saving her money to get a used iPad. And she said, so periodically she goes online and sees what's available. And the other day she went out there and she looked at the iPads out there, and there was one out there, and she said, well, there's no point investigating that anymore. And I asked her why, and she said, the price is so low. So she immediately, at 10 years old, understood the relationship between value and price. At 10 years old. So we learned that lesson very quickly. And yes, when we have to demonstrate the value, and we have to understand that not everyone values what we have to offer, that the market is much, much smaller than we typically think it is. When we define the market as being those people who are willing to pay your price, good times or bad. And consistently raising the prices is an essential element. I mean, decades ago, I had a client, I just started working with him, and when he told me that he hadn't raised prices in 5 years. And I asked him, I said, well, what are your customers saying about that? And he said, well, we really don't survey our customers. And I said, well, what is your sales force telling you that your customers are saying to them? Oh, he said, you have to understand our compensation program. Our salespeople are compensated on new accounts. And I looked at him and said, so what you're telling me is your salespeople have no incentive to go back and talk to an existing customer? No. Okay, well, number one priority became changing the sales compensation structure, right? So that they're going back and finding out what those customers' needs are, how they're evolving, how they're changing, so that they can then position themselves to keep adding value over a period of time with people who already know you, trust you, and enjoy dealing with you. The concepts are so simple, and yet we struggle with them so terribly. It's just mind-boggling at times. Did I answer your question, Steve? Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.